I don't know about you, but when I hear stories like that, and when I get to tell stories like that, I can sometimes be tempted to fall into the trap of kind of believing what people say about me. And at this point, I'm not even saying like what people say about our church, but I can sometimes fall into the trap of believing what people have to say about me, whether it's for something nice like that, but maybe there's some of you in the room that you can fall into the trap of just believing everything people say about you on a negative side or on the positive side. I can fall into the trap of believing that I have more power than I really have, because sometimes people say some really nice things. And they say some things about leadership abilities and about the authority that I can carry in positions that I've been in. And it can be tempting to start to believe that I really have some of the authority that they assume that I have. It can also be tempting, and maybe you can relate to this, to sometimes fall into the trap of wanting more power and authority than I actually have. And really, sometimes when we share stories like I just shared about collecting for the Blue Jeans Center, we can fall into the trap of, I do these things so that I can get recognition, so that I can have more influence and I can have more power and I can have more authority in the long run. I've fallen into that trap in my life. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that some of you, if not all of you, at some point in your life have fallen into one of those two traps, as far as you either believe that you have more authority and then you abuse it, or you want more authority so that you can have a better position, and we run into those things. And the truth of the matter is, that's how humanity's been ever since we were created. Going all the way back to the garden, they wanted to have more authority and more power than they were previously given. The serpent, the devil, came in and he convinced them, you are more powerful than you think you are. And then he convinced them, you should have a better position than you have. And he started speaking these lies. And then Jesus comes along later on, and the same things were going on. There were people who were walking around who were abusing the power that they thought that they had, and there were other people who were walking along wanting to have more power than they felt like they had. And now we come to our day and age, and I'm gonna go back 20 years to start this, which is actually the year I graduated. I forgive all of you for not celebrating my graduation with me 20 years ago. I just celebrated my 20-year class reunion. They had a reunion. I didn't know about it. Turns out when the class president is absent for 20 years, he doesn't get told what's going on with the class that he was president of, but that's beside the point. So we had our 20-year class reunion, but in 2002, there was a book written by the name of Queen Bees and Wannabes. And to get the full title for you, Queen Bees and Wannabes, Helping Your Daughter Survive Cliques, Gossip, Boyfriends, and Other Realities of Adolescence. It's written by a lady named Rosalind Wiseman, and it was just what it sounds like. It was a survival guide. It was a self-help book for girls in particular to get through middle school and high school when you have all of the, you've got the status issues going on, and you've got the girls who are like the it girls, and you've got the other girls who are not the it girls, and you've got the it girls picking on the not it girls, and you got the not it girls trying to, get to the position of the it girl and all this stuff. And Rosalind looks at this and she realizes this isn't healthy. We've got to help girls somehow navigate through this stage. And then 2 years later, the book that she wrote that was kind of popular got a lot more popular when Tina Fey read the book, and she thought, we can make a movie out of that. And Mean Girls came into play. A movie that in 2004, a lot of people my age anyway, just ate up that, and I should say in particular a lot of females my age, just ate up that movie with Lindsay Lohan and others who were in the movie. I can't lie. I didn't watch the movie. I'm okay with that. I know that the guy who later on played Turk on Scrubs was in that movie, but I know him as Turk, not as whatever his name was in Mean Girls. But now, we're coming along 18 years later, and we still hear that term Mean Girls used when we're talking about certain people in the schools. 18 years, it still rings true. 2,000 years, it still rings true. Since the beginning of creation, it still rings true. So as I'm looking at that, and I didn't read the self-help book in 2002, and I didn't watch the movie in 2004, but as I'm reading about the ideas behind these and I'm seeing just how true this still rings today, I thought, you know what, let's just steal some of their terminology this morning. And so this morning, we're going to talk about queen bees, we're going to talk about wannabes, and then because I needed another one that rhymed that went along with what Jesus actually told us, we're going to talk about flunkies. I actually had to Google what a synonym is for the word that I wanted to use so that I could find one that rhymed with bees and I guess bees no matter what. So we're going to look at queen bees, wannabes, and flunkies, and we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 9 to start to see how Jesus interacted with some of these types of people. Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 9, he's having an interaction with some people that we'll read about here in a little bit, but there was a group of people that looked at the kind of people that Jesus hung out with and really didn't think very much of them, to the point that this is what happened here. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Remember, we talked several weeks ago about how tax collectors were viewed in that society. They're still not people's favorite people today. Like, nobody sits there and goes, I would really love to sit down across the table from the IRS agent. Now, maybe if they're just a person at that moment, but if they're in their position at the time, nobody wants to sit down with an IRS agent. But then they were a whole lot, they were viewed a whole lot lower. So anyway, follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. Later, Matthew, this tax collector, this person that nobody likes, invited Jesus, who was, had a pretty good reputation. A lot of people liked him. They liked what he was doing. He was viewed pretty highly in people's eyes, except for by a certain group of people. Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many other tax collectors and disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, when the queen bees, when the it people, when the mean girls, when they saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with such," and listen to this word they use, "scum"? Can you look down your nose much more at people when you get to the point that you begin to describe them as scum? See, the Pharisees were people who studied the law of Moses, who knew that God had given these 600 plus laws, and they sort of kind of did their best to follow them, but what they really tried to do was to make sure that everybody else followed those laws, and including a few that they just kind of tacked on themselves. And if you couldn't do it, you were a horrible person, you were a miserable person, you were scum. Tax collectors weren't worth the stick that you used to scrape the gum off the bottom of your shoe. That's how they viewed these people that Jesus was hanging out with. And they're looking at Jesus and his followers, and they're asking them, how could you do that? Why would you hurt your reputation like that? Now, we fast forward 2,000 years to where we are today, and I would put out there for us, have we changed that much? Now, we can go outside of the spiritual realm, and we can just look at the relationships that we have with people, and we can see pretty easily and pretty quickly that there are people who view themselves as being better than the people that they come into contact with. We don't like to admit it, but many times we can be those people who view ourselves as better than the people that we come into contact with. Have you ever driven through a city and you see the person standing on the corner with their sign and their clothes all ratty and they look like they stink, and you sit there and you're like, man, what did they do to mess up? What did they do to put themselves into that situation? Because the flip side of what's going on in our mind is obviously they didn't do things in their life as good as I've done things in my life, because they're in that situation and I'm not. There may be some truth to that. They may have done things to put themselves in that position. They also may not have. And regardless, does that make us better than them? Now, we live in an area where a lot of people are still living around the same people that you went to high school with. and that you went to middle school with. And here's where I'm going to put it out to you, that while I'm not saying it goes overboard in the Knox County area, but I'm saying it exists in the Knox County area inside the church and outside the church, is I can't tell you the number of times. I'm not saying it's like some exorbitant number, like 100 times or whatever, but I can't tell you the number of times that I've had someone, as I'm getting ready to go eat lunch with somebody, or as I'm talking about somebody that I met in the store, or somebody that I'm talking to. Because remember, I'm not from here. I don't know anybody from around here. I'm getting to the point where I know some people, but for the last 2 years, I haven't known very many people, and I can't tell you the number of times that somebody else comes along and makes sure that I understand what that person was like in high school. I mean, they might follow it up with the caveat of, I understand that people change, but just so you know, when they were in high school, they were sleeping with everybody. Or in high school, like they were high all the way through, all 4 years. And okay, maybe they've changed in the last 20 years, but I want you to know they probably haven't. That's some of the subtle undertones that I hear in this, is that we can easily get to the point, without even realizing it, that we have become the queen bee, the Pharisee, who looks down our nose at people who don't live, or maybe just didn't live, a life of good repute. Who did Jesus hang out with? He didn't hang out with the people who were making sure that you understood how bad that other person was that you were hanging out with. He hung out with the ones that were described as scum. See, queen bees miss Jesus when they abuse the power that they think that they have. Not the power they have, the power that they think that they have. Now, it may be that it's a blatant abuse of it in school. They may be the bully in the school. They may be, like from the movie or from the book, they may be the person that's really intentionally making others around them feel poor about themselves. Or it may just be that they're abusing where they are at in life with good standing that they have, to make sure that everyone around them knows that that person isn't in as good a spot as I'm in. Now let's look at another story. Before we finish that story out, I want us to look at another story. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus is walking along, and he's with his disciples, and a couple of his disciples. Now there's two different accounts of this, and I understand that depending on which gospel account you read, it reads a little bit different. And one of these, they say that the mother comes up to Jesus and asks for these things. And another account, the one that we're going to read, it says the sons come up and they ask. And I know that those are things we can look at and we're like, okay, they're not telling the same story here. And that's where it's important to remember that sometimes as we think back to things, some of those little details, like husband and wife might remember the exact same thing. They might remember the very little details differently. I'm actually looking at Doug and Julie over here, and they're both nodding their heads yes. I wish you guys could see some of the things I see up here sometimes. Julie's actually a little bit more adamant with her shake. And now Doug's shaking his head no. See, seriously, if you could see all the things I see. Anyway, I got sidetracked there for a second. We remember the little details different, but do they get the big details the same? And that's where in these two accounts we see they get the big details the same. In Mark chapter 10 it says, "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him," being Jesus. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." "What's your request?" he asked them. And they replied, "When you sit on your glorious throne." Now, remember, they're thinking at this point when he sits on the throne that rules over all of this physical stuff in front of us. They haven't connected yet that his kingdom is very different than the worldly kingdom that we're talking about. "But when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and one on your left." But Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering that I'm about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized?" And in their brains, what they're thinking is, "Oh, I'm ready to go to battle with you. Absolutely. I've got my sword ready." Like that's where their minds are. And they look at him and they're like, "Yeah, We're able to do those things. We're ready. Let's go, especially if it's going to get me this position of power to your left and to your, yeah, that was a voice crack. Puberty sometimes comes back. We're ready for this. And then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or on my left, for God has prepared those places for the ones that he has chosen. And then when the other 10 disciples heard about this, remember there's 12 main disciples that are walking along, and the other 10 just heard these two say, hey, we want to be top dogs. And the other 10 are like, baloney. I want the top. They're indignant about what they hear. Like you can almost see them looking at each other, and they're like sticking out their chest like, what are you asking for? Like, come on, what's the deal here? And they're upset about this question that they ask. See, James and John and the other 10 disciples all wanted to have more power than they had. They all wanted to have a higher position than they had. They all wanted to be big deals in the world that looked at them. They all wanted to sit at the right hand and the left hand of the guy who was going to be in charge of everything. They were the wannabes that wanted to have the things that weren't attainable for them. And wannabes miss Jesus when they search for the power that they want to have. Because they're not searching for Jesus, they're searching for power. And we can do this in a lot of different ways in the year 2022. We can search for political power, yes. We can search for power at work, yes. But I'm talking about something even what feels like smaller scale than that. We can search for the power that comes with the influence of being recognized for all the great things that I've done. To where we get to the point where we stop doing things because we should just do good things, and we start doing them so that people will look at me, because if I do enough good things, then eventually people will think better things of me, and if people think better things of me, then I can be in a better position to make decisions. I can be in a better position to steer other people's decisions. I can be in a better position in the workplace to make money. I can be in a better position to do whatever it is that I'm desiring to do, and I'm going to search for that kind of power. I don't have it, but I want it. I'm a wannabe. Now again, I didn't watch the movie Mean Girls in 2004, but my wife did like 30 times. And so she got really excited when I mentioned I might have to watch it in preparation for this message. She's like, really? And then we didn't watch it. It was great. Don't tell her I said that. Nate? No. Okay, Dara, we need to start having the youth out of here on Sunday mornings. But from what I hear in the movie, is there's this stage in the movie where the girls who aren't the ones in power, who aren't the queen bees, who aren't the mean girls, they want that position. They want to have the popularity in the right. Now, by the end of the movie, things have changed a little bit, but there's a point where they want to take the mean girls down a notch. And take them down a notch so that I can go up a notch. And we see, I realize that's a movie, but I think that a lot of times what we see in our movies tends to reflect a lot of real life stuff. Let's look at some Marvel movies that have been the biggest grossing movies over the last 10 years or so. And in every single one of these movies, there is a bad guy and there is a good guy or girl or a group of people. But there's the protagonist and there's the antagonist. And what we see from the protagonist over and over and over again in these movies and other movies is that for them to actually win, for them to actually gain power that makes a difference, it's not by being the queen bee or the wannabe. It's actually by following a scriptural truth that Jesus talked about. Let's look at the end of those two stories that we looked at. Back to Matthew chapter 9. Jesus responds to the Pharisees, the ones who said, "Why would you eat with such scum?" His response to them is that when Jesus heard this, he said, "Healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do." And then he added, "Now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I don't want your sacrifice. I'm not worried about all those things that you have done to gain your power. I don't want those. I want you to show mercy. For I have come to call those not who think they are righteous, not who think they are better than everybody else, but those who know that they are sinners. When we get to the point that we begin to view ourselves as better than everyone around us, what we have done is we have removed ourselves from the list of people that Jesus has come for. It is not until we recognize that we are sinners just like everyone else, that we're not inherently better than everyone else. I haven't come for those who think they are righteous. I've come for those who think, I've come for the scum that you're talking about. That's who I'm here for. As we sit here and we think, well, we can't go around those people because these people that I go to church with are going to think less of me because of it. Jesus is saying, no, you know the people that I hung out with? I hung out with the ones that these people over here look down on. And you know what? They did think less of me for it. They killed me for it. That's still how I did this. How do you respond to the wannabes? In Mark chapter 10, he says, so Jesus called them together and said, you know, remember this is James and John have come up and said, we want to be the two top guys in your kingdom, in your government. It says, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people. Hasn't changed much. And officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave to everyone else. For even the Son of Man, even the one that you're coming to saying, I want to sit at your right and your left, even that guy, me, he came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. So he looks at these people who are looking for the position. He says, you want to know how this really works in my kingdom? Stop looking for the position. Stop looking for the power. In fact, intentionally give that power away. You gain power by using the power that you do have because you're a follower of mine and you're in my kingdom by serving other people, by putting other people ahead of you, by taking the scum that the Pharisees talked about in that other conversation we had and serving those scum. Getting down on your hands and your knees and getting dirty. That's how you become high in my kingdom. That's how you become important in my kingdom. Flunkies find Jesus by giving away the power that they already have. They don't look down their noses at people. They look at people through the lens of Christ, through the eyes of Christ. They don't see, when they look at somebody, they don't on the street corner, they don't see prostitute. They see child of God who I've been called to serve. They don't see druggie. They see child of God who I've been called to serve. They don't see stay away. They see child of God who I've been called to serve. Jesus he hung out with the dirty, nasty lepers with an infectious disease. And he touched those people. Now, leprosy has kind of lost a little of its meaning in our world. But we hear people who have a dirty, nasty disease, and we're like, I'm not getting anywhere near you. And no, I'm not talking about COVID. I'm just talking in general. We look at people who smell bad. We look at people who have lice on their head. We look at people who have some of the, these things where they're just not clean, and we're like, clean yourself up. Jesus came along his disciples who had dirty, nasty, stinky feet, and he got down on his feet and he cleaned them for them, did the job of a servant for them. The one who they had said, hey, I want to sit at your right and at your left, he got down and he cleaned their feet. And he told us things like, so those who are now first among you, they're going to be last. And those who are last, they're going to be the ones who are first among you. He told you things like, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you were doing that to me. He told us things like, since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. He told us and this is actually Paul writing, not Paul, Luke, Paul, Paul said this. There we go, got there. Took me a little bit, sorry. In Acts chapter 10, Jesus wasn't actually speaking in this moment, but Paul quotes Jesus when he says, in every way I've shown you that by laboring like this, it is necessary to help the weak and to keep in mind the words of the Lord Jesus. For he said that it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Completely the opposite of what the world was like back then. Completely the opposite of what the world was like back in Genesis and Exodus. Completely opposite of what the world is like in 2022. Jesus continually comes out and he says the thing that we don't expect somebody in his position to say. Instead of saying, hey, you want to get powerful, go out here and get attention from everybody. You want to be powerful, make sure everybody knows all the good things that you do. You want to be powerful, make sure everybody knows how much better you are than they are. No, he comes along and says, you want to be powerful? Make yourself last. Stop considering yourself to be so good. Here's the good news about both of these stories that we read. I mean, they're hard when we really start being honest with ourselves as to where we land in these stories and who we identify with the most, because we sometimes have to get to the point where we realize that I'm a lot more like that Pharisee than I want to admit. Or we have to get to the point where we admit that I'm a lot more like James and John and those other 10 disciples than I want to admit. Like, we want to think that after 2,000 years of having these teachings of Jesus written down, that maybe we've figured it out. And as we read stories like this, we have to admit that we still haven't gotten it. But the good news is that he tells us in these stories that once you figure that out, then I am ready to give you more power than you have any idea what to do with. Once you get to the point that you realize that you are not that big of a deal, I am ready to do some big things through you. Once you realize that you are not the righteous, but that you are the sinner in the story, guess what? Now you're the one that I came for. You're the one that I gave up my life for, and we can start getting some serious stuff done. But first, you have to recognize, I have to recognize where we're at in this story. So I'm going to ask you this morning, who are you in these stories? And I would say that most likely, you're probably not any of them all the time. You're probably not always the queen bee, or always the wannabe, or always the flunky. In fact, sometimes the queen bee comes around another queen bee and they realize now I'm the wannabe, and we run into things like that. I get that. So we're not always the same person. But I'm going to challenge you to look deep and say, which one do I most often truly identify with? And is there a part of me that needs to confess this morning that sometimes I'm the queen bee in the story? Consider the conversations that you've had this past week or this past month. Consider the things that you've said about others. Maybe it's somebody that you know from high school, middle school. Maybe it's somebody that you work with. Maybe it's somebody that you've never met and they're a celebrity and you've decided you're going to look down your nose at them. Is there any piece of you this morning that needs to confess that, yeah, I can be a queen bee? Is there any piece of you this morning that needs to confess that I can be the wannabe? I can be the person who's sitting there and going, I want to make sure that everybody notices just how good I am, so that I can gain power, so that I can get more attention, so that I can get more likes on Facebook or Insta or TikTok or Snap or whatever it is, so that I can be more popular, so that I don't get viewed at as the scum, but I get viewed at as the popular, the important person. Maybe you need to confess this morning that you've got some of that heart inside of you. I'll confess to you this morning that sometimes I have both of those hearts inside of me. That I do have those moments where not only am I tempted to consider myself more important than I really am and to use that over other people, sometimes I go beyond temptation and I go to the believing and acting on part. And sometimes I sit there and I think, I don't want to sit at that table of people because I want to sit at the popular table. I'm going to be 39 years old next week, and I still have those moments where I just want to sit at the popular table and be one of the cool kids. And Jesus is saying, no, I need you to sit at the other table. And I need you to make sure that they understand how much I love them. And it's when you truly do that you are going to, again, Jesus talking to me, that you're going to understand how much I love you. I used to, as a youth pastor, we would sometimes have middle school and high school together. And the high school would always sit there and they would complain about having these little middle schoolers running around. I don't want to hang out with these little brats. They're so annoying. And I would sit there as the adult and sometimes gently and sometimes less gently remind them, I'm 15 years older than you. You are not as mature as you think you are. But then I had to realize that sometimes I'm the high schooler in the room who's looking down on the middle schooler and thinking, these people, if only they could just get their poop in a group, then we can actually move forward with life and things could get better. So, I'm going to ask you to be willing to confess that this morning, but not just sit there and confess it and do nothing about it. If that's you in here this morning, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, I need to confess one of those two, Queen Bee or Wannabes, I'm going to ask you to stand right now, which means other people are going to know that you're having to confess these things. Anybody like me? Yeah. And now I'm going to invite you to pray with me that God would give us the heart of the flunky. That God would give us the servant heart that he called us to. And as we leave here today, that we would remind ourselves of the prayer that we are getting ready to pray. That we would remind us of what it is that he has called us to do and called us to be. And the example that he has set for us. God, you had every right. Jesus, you had every right to lord your authority over everybody that you came into contact with. Compared to you, everyone you came into contact with was scum. But instead of having that heart, you continually showed us that you viewed everybody that you came into contact with as a child of God, as a masterpiece. As someone with power coursing through them, because you had a gift of the Holy Spirit to give them, and they had the breath of the Father put inside of them at their creation. And you viewed people through that lens. And you served them. You served us. You died for them. You died for us. So God, today we come before you. I come before you, confessing that sometimes we lose sight and we slip right back into, and sometimes we've never exited, that we do view ourselves as better than, or we take an approach to life that is all about making sure that we get viewed as better than, and we don't focus on the call that you've put on our life to serve those around us. God, I pray this morning that you would continue to show us and to teach us what it is to be a servant to all, to be last instead of first. I pray that you would remind us of those words that John the Baptist spoke, that we would step into those words, that in order for you to increase, we must decrease, and help us understand how to do that. And that isn't us becoming less in the sense of less important. It's us becoming less so that you can do more through us, so that your purposes can be done. God, I pray that I might decrease so that you might increase, so that you, the marvelous Son of God, would be the King and the Savior in our lives. God, we stand amazed at who you are, what you did, what you do, and in the belief of what you're going to do. Help us as we leave this place to walk in with that heart, with your heart of a servant.